Hi, everyone. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director at Friends of the Everglades, here with my colleague Gil Smart, who is Policy Director at Friends of the Everglades and also wears a second hat as Executive Director of Vote Water. He's here with us on behalf of Friends of the Everglades today, and we are going to talk about the state legislative session that should be over by now, but is actually still happening. So, as you know, if you've tuned in before, we host pre-session legislative live streams, mid-session legislative live streams, and theoretically post-session legislative live streams. However, the session that's pending in Tallahassee is still ongoing because of some conflicts that we're going to talk about today. We're going to explain what's happened on the budget front, what's happened with bills we've been tracking, and this is all part of an enhanced legislative accountability initiative that Friends of the Everglades launched more than 3 years ago with support from the Tierney and Wetzel Foundation. We're very grateful to them. So thanks to all of you for tuning in today. If you're watching live on YouTube or on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, you can ask questions in the comments there. If you're on Instagram, we'll have to carry them over here, but we'll get to as many of your questions as possible through the end of the hour here. We build this discussion today as being focused on whether our state parks have in fact been saved. So of course, we're going to update you on what's happened with the State Park Preservation Act that was top of mind for so many of us in the environmental community over the past year. But we're also going to update you on a number of other bills. All in all, we had a pretty good session defensively, and Gil's going to talk about that. But there was one very concerning environmental bill that was passed that we'll brief you on, and always some other good bills that didn't go anywhere. So let me just zoom out for a moment here and talk about session started March 4th. It was supposed to end May 2nd. We're dragging on here, and it has been officially extended into June so far, and we expect another extension. But I want to zoom out even beyond that to talk about the divided government we kind of saw in Tallahassee. Now, for any of you who even casually follow politics in Florida, you know we have a supermajority in Tallahassee, supermajority Republican legislature. However, the House was feuding with the Senate. The House was feuding with Governor DeSantis, and we saw what looked to be a divided government. And in some ways, that can be more productive because you don't just have rubber stamping of proposals throughout legislative sessions. So in a sense, I think that helped on the state parks front and hurt us in other ways. We scored on defense and offense this year. We're really proud of the focus that we put on state parks and some other issues. And we'll just jump right into it now. If we can cue up the slides, I'll talk a little bit about the priorities that we set out for Friends of the Everglades at the beginning of the session. So if we could advance to the next slide. All right. Well, this is our legislative accountability portal. And if you go to everglades.org and click on legislative accountability, you can go right to this page and click on bills we're tracking to find out where specific bills are, what our position is on them, whether they've been signed into the law by the governor or not. Very few bills have been so far that we're tracking, by the way. And we update this page throughout session, and you can also go back and watch previous live streams and look at information from previous sessions. So again, all part of the legislative accountability work that we ramped up to help keep you guys informed about what happens in far off Tallahassee. Next slide, please. All right. Before I hand it over to Gil, I want to refresh everyone's memory on the legislative priorities that we at Friends of the Everglades staked out ahead of session. And these are largely consistent year after year. We really want to send the message to lawmakers across the state that these are important issues and protections that Floridians believe in, and we at Friends of the Everglades believe in. So number one is rescue the river of grass. This is an initiative that we launched earlier this year, focused on land acquisition south of Lake Okeechobee, using the state's land acquisition trust fund dollars. More to come on that. The second priority was protecting wetlands. That bad bill I mentioned at the outset actually undercuts our wetland protections a bit, and we'll tell you why. Protecting wetlands is fundamental to the Everglades, which that half of the Everglades watershed has been drained over the decades. So we need to protect every last wetland we still have within it. And it's just fundamental to Florida. I mean, wetlands perform so many services to our ecosystem and our economy. The third was protecting Florida state parks. We'll revisit what happened after the threat of golf courses and hotels emerged last summer, and how we did in fact score a win on this front. Fourth is taking bold steps to improve water quality. Safe to say the state legislature has not taken great bold steps on that front, and we'll tell you why. Number 5, don't ban fertilizer bans. We're holding the line on this. Some of you will recall that in recent sessions in years past, the state legislature has tried to preempt local governments from enacting restrictive fertilizer bans during the rainy season, for instance. So we actually held the line okay there. Threats can always reemerge. Number 6, smarter controlled development, a perennial issue in Florida. And number 7, stopping sugarcane burning. That remains an issue, and the legislature is unfortunately not responsive to that yet. All right, so I'm gonna hand it over to Gil to talk about where we landed this session. Gil spent a lot of time in Tallahassee this year, worked with our lobby team in Tallahassee, and really appreciate all the hard work you did, Gil. I'll hand it to you.
Thank you very much. You can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is just a slide showing that, as Eve mentioned, the legislative session did begin back in March, was supposed to end on May 2nd, but now the House is talking about extending it all the way through June 30th. The Senate has not said anything about that. Basically, legislators were told not to come back before the holiday here. So who knows? They have to have a budget by June 30th. Otherwise, the government shuts down on July 1st, I believe. But they're really far apart. They're kind of sniping at each other if you've been watching the news. So we're nowhere near any sort of budget agreement, and it's not going to be until after the holiday here until we start really talking about it. So, but let's talk good news. Let's talk about the State Parks Protection Act, which was one of our big focuses this year, us and a lot of other conservation groups. And lo and behold, House Bill 209 passed. You can see Representative John Snyder, Representative Peggy Gossett-Seidman were 2 co-sponsors of House Bill 209 in the House. Senator Gail Harrell, Senator Jennifer Bradley behind Senate Bill 80 in the Senate. Both of those bills got out of the gate pretty quick with a lot of fanfare. Everybody remembers, I guess, what happened last summer in terms of the inappropriate development proposals in state parks that sparked protests across Florida. Obviously, that was the impetus behind these folks proposing these bills in the first place. They got out of the gate real quick. They stalled. Then they started to pick up some steam, but they needed a little tweaking. And Eve, why don't you talk a little bit about how Friends of the Everglades was involved in helping to perfect these bills?
Sure. So Friends of the Everglades, while we're still very active in Miami-Dade County and South Florida as a whole, we're actually headquartered now in Martin County. And Martin County's Jonathan Dickinson State Park was kind of ground zero for the state parks threat last summer. The park, which includes really incredible scrub habitat and other environmentally sensitive features, was proposed for 3 golf courses. A nonprofit veteran-related organization had banded together with Jack Nicklaus, the golf legend, to propose these golf courses that would be built in what should be our most closely guarded public lands in Florida. So people, needless to say, were outraged. Really have to commend so many folks in the community for just banding together, communicating clearly. Jessica Namath is one who put together a Facebook group that 40,000 plus people joined, and she remains really active in informing the public, not just here in Martin County, but across the state. Florida Wildlife Federation was one of the first to come out the gate and flag this threat. And then many of us in the environmental community got together and showed up and waved signs last summer. So that did result in the bill that Gil just articulated. And there were some problems with the bill. There were some loopholes. And we wanted to make sure that if a bill passed, it wouldn't have loopholes to allow the very thing that we were trying to prevent. So we looked at the language really closely, worked with partners at Florida Springs Council, Thousand Friends of Florida, to examine the language and figure out what we could be satisfied with as closing those loopholes. And we brought that language to Representative Snyder, and to his immense credit, he took that language and amended it onto his version of the bill, House Bill 209. And that happened when we were up in Tallahassee in early April. We were there the day the amendment passed in committee unanimously. This is a rare case of bipartisan support. And then we had a long way to go from there. It had to be taken up on the Senate side. And to make a long story short, there was a bad amendment filed that was beat back. And then the closing the loophole language eventually made it into the Senate version of the bill, along with a couple other little tweaks that we were not concerned about. And the bill passed both chambers unanimously. And now it sits, and we're waiting for the governor, for it to be transmitted to the governor first, and then for him to sign it. So a lot of sausage making behind the scenes, and we were really involved in that and got a front row seat, but in the end, a success.
And Governor DeSantis has indicated that he will sign it. He basically has until mid-June to do so. The bill has not yet been sent to him, but we're all keeping a very close eye on this because this is a big win. The legislation that wound up being passed by the House and the Senate is pretty airtight. So we're happy with it, and other groups are as well. We don't always get wins here in the conservation community, but when we do, we got to celebrate them, and this is definitely one of them. So
I'll add, Gil, that I want to thank folks who signed the message to Governor DeSantis asking him to sign the bill into law. About 2,300 Friends of the Everglades supporters have sent messages to him. That's still relevant, even though he said at a press conference last week he's going to sign it. We want to make sure that he signs it, that the ink dries, that this thing becomes law. So we'll put a link to that message to the governor in the chat. If you haven't signed it already, please do so.
So this was a win when we were on offense. This was a win when we were on defense. This was one of the worst ideas of this session, the idea of an agricultural enclave, which if you think about sort of like a sore thumb, right, sticking out like a sore thumb, a piece of agricultural land surrounded on numerous sides by development. The initial bill, Senate Bill 1118, sponsored by Senator Stan McClain, right there. We'll see him again in a little bit. The idea was that you basically get a break if you wanted to develop that land, that agricultural enclave. You would have to get administrative approval, like approval by the staff of like your county or municipality, but you wouldn't have to go through the public approval process. There wouldn't have to be public hearings on the matter. There wouldn't have to be the type of scrutiny that generally accompanies sort of large-scale development proposals here in Florida. You'd basically get a pass from all that. It was a terrible idea, but that bill was moving until near the end of session. That bill died. Senate Bill 1118 died. But the agricultural enclave language was then grafted onto a second bill, also sponsored by Senator Stan McClain. This was Senate Bill 80. The House equivalent was House Bill 579, a local government land regulation. So that was amended to include that language. But then the full Senate voted down Senate Bill 80. With some members commenting that they didn't like the agricultural enclave language. Ultimately, what happened was the bill was resurrected. It was amended to remove that language, and the underlying bill passed. So again, this is something else, yet another session of sprawl type thing that would have permitted developers to have more leeway, more advantage, less public scrutiny of development. It generated quite a bit of animosity across Florida, and it died. Now we have the asterisk. Explain the asterisk next to that.
As Gil and I were working on these slides ahead of this chat here, we didn't want to say that this bad proposal was definitively dead. So we added the asterisk because this proposal and other bad legislation could be amended onto the budget. We've seen that happen in past years, and we're remaining vigilant as these budget talks drag on in Tallahassee. We just need to watch to make sure that none of these bad proposals come back like zombies and wreak havoc. So we'll be on it, and we'll keep you posted if that happens. And just want to mention, Stan McClain, he's become a bit of a repeat offender in terms of filing legislation that is not protective of growth management in Florida.
Yeah, and he said early in session, and I believe it was on a hearing for Senate Bill 1118, that the idea was to make things easier for developers. Well, one might argue we've already made things quite easy for developers here in Florida, and we ought not to be making things even easier. So,
Yes.
But that was apparently the explicit intent of this bill, this idea. For now, bad ideas in Tallahassee never really die. They always get resurrected. It's just a question of when. But for the time being, anyway, we can breathe a little easier, I guess, on this one. This was another one. This was an interesting bill, an interesting situation. Senate Bill 1822 would have prohibited local governments from regulating the use of auxiliary containers, like the item that's in the photo there. It was tremendously controversial. At the same time as this bill was moving, there were other bills that expressly would have allowed local governments to regulate the use of auxiliary containers. This would not have allowed it. This goes against home rule. This would strip local governments of their ability to regulate these containers as they see fit. And it was moving, but it was controversial, as noted. Ultimately, this bill, and there were a lot of conservation groups who were very, very involved in pushing back on this. And ultimately, they generated, I think, thousands of emails, thousands of phone calls. Ultimately, Senate Bill 1822, once again, near the finish line, it stalled. Again, the offensive language was grafted onto another bill, House Bill 1609. That got to be kind of interesting because after that language was amended onto it, the House rejected it. The Senate insisted that it go forth. They were bickering back and forth, and as they were doing so, the clock ran out. So again, once again, we've got an asterisk next to this that is dead for the time being, but there's always the possibility that this bad idea could be grafted on some of the budget legislation. And
yeah, you had some powerful interests like Publix supporting this, and then some really great groups like Florida Springs Council, who I mentioned before, and Oceana leading the charge to beat this back. And they were successful, and we're really glad they were.
Yeah. This was one we had been watching very closely, Senate Bill 7002 about water management districts. This would have was all about new transparency and accountability for water management districts, which of course is a good thing, except it seemed to target specifically the South Florida Water Management District, which deals with Everglades restoration issues. And initially in the session, Senator Jason Brodeur, who'd been the sponsor of this, had said something to the effect of they wanted to rein in mission creep among water management districts. And we weren't sure what about Everglades restoration might be considered mission creep, but this bill would have imposed all sorts of new budgetary requirements and disclosure requirements, that sort of thing. And it apparently was a priority of Senate leadership. Another aspect of the Senate bill was it authorized, it basically told the South Florida Water Management District to focus on the acquiring land for a reservoir north of Lake Okeechobee. The LOCAR, the Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir Project, has long been proposed. We at Friends of the Everglades think you get a much better bang for your Everglades restoration buck with storage south of the lake rather than north of the lake. So that was something we were keeping an eye on as well. Ultimately, though, it was kind of odd that this was a priority of Senate leadership, because down the stretch of this bill got stripped. A lot of the language came out of this bill, and then at the end it didn't pass anyway. So much ado about nothing, I guess. Again, if this was indeed a Senate leadership priority, we are likely to see something like this next year. But for the time being, asterisk, it's dead.
Yeah, I'll chime in real quick on that, Gil. The mission creep concerns were confusing to me because, yes, water management districts are charged with flood control and water supply, ensuring water supply. But in the South Florida Water Management District, which is the footprint of the historic Everglades, that has to involve meaningful Everglades restoration. We have to have projects that store and clean water and return these lands as close as possible back to the natural state to protect our water supply, to protect us from flooding. So they go hand in hand. And the allegation that Everglades restoration is mission creep never really made sense to me anyway.
Well, and at the same time that, the legislature is talking about reining in the water management districts, Governor DeSantis was talking about how the Army Corps of Engineers basically should surrender all authority and Everglades restoration projects to the state, because the state is so much better and quicker and more efficient at getting these projects done. And the question would be, well, if the reforms proposed in this bill would have taken hold, would have gone into effect, would that have affected that efficiency and sort of getting these projects done? So I don't know, a lot of unanswered questions, but apparently they're going to remain unanswered this year because this thing is, with an asterisk, dead. This one is not dead, and we would all be better off if it would be. This we are calling the worst environmental bill to pass this session. And there's our buddy Stan McLean again. Representative Wyman Duggan was the sponsor of the House Bill 1175. Those who follow along here may remember Representative Duggan as one of the sponsors of a couple years ago Senate Bill 540, which saddles those citizens who challenge a comprehensive plan amendment and lose with the other side's legal fees. That was his bright idea. And so was this. This has to do with mitigation banks. So in Florida, if you're a developer and you're going to build a project that's going to have impact on wetlands, the idea is that you're supposed to buy mitigation credits in the same watershed. Mitigation credits are generated when someone plants new seagrasses or does some sort of environmental activity that helps wetlands. While you're harming wetlands, the idea is it offsets. Wetland mitigation is all about offsetting impacts. This bill allows developers to buy wetland mitigation bank credits generated in a different watershed. So you could, in your local watershed, let's say your local watershed is having trouble with the seagrass, there's been a lot of development, and here comes another developer with a proposal to build something. They can destroy more wetlands in your watershed so long as they buy mitigation bank credits generated in a different watershed. So you could be like in, let's say our Lake Okeechobee region. Well, as long as I buy mitigation bank credits generated in, say, Jacksonville or somewhere in the Panhandle, it's all good. It's not all good. That's obviously detrimental for your local watershed where the impacts are going to be magnified because there's going to be no additional mitigation there. Jacksonville or wherever may have the best wetlands in Florida, but that doesn't do your local watershed a lot of good. And there were constitutional questions raised about this issue. We, in fact, had spoken with some attorneys who says this could be what's considered an unconstitutional exaction. I won't go into chapter and verse on that because it's a very complex legal term, but during discussion of this bill on the Senate floor, Senator Lori Berman repeatedly raised the question, aren't there constitutional issues with this legislation? And the answer from McLean was, no, it's fine. We may see ultimately if there's a court challenge, if in fact it is fine.
I'll chime in and say our friends at the Waterkeepers Alliance of Florida are asking Governor DeSantis to veto this bad bill, and we totally support that veto request. And we will put the link to that in the chat so that you can send a message to Governor DeSantis asking him to veto it. Again, we have already destroyed and filled in many wetlands in Florida. Florida was largely wetlands at one time, and the wetlands that still remain need to be protected wherever possible. And if mitigation has to occur, and there's a legitimate debate to be had about whether it should be allowed anywhere, but if it occurs, it should happen in the same watershed so that the damage that occurs when you fill in a wetland is somewhat offset, at least by mitigation in the watershed itself.
Right. Yeah, it makes no sense. Otherwise, you're going to wind up essentially sacrificing the watersheds that have the most impacts on wetlands and the most endangered wetlands. You're going to just make things worse, is what it does. But you can understand, again, if your goal is, per McLean's comment, to make things easier for developers, well, talk about some of the most developed areas in Florida. They're likely going to be the places where you've already seen the biggest impact on wetlands, and additional development is only going to magnify impact on wetlands. So, the wise thing to do would be to hit the brakes, but that's not how we roll here in Florida.
Yeah. And wetland mitigation is a bit of a cottage industry. Like there are private companies that make money off of these mitigation banks, and so there's money to be had on the other side of it too, as this destruction is allowed.
Indeed. All right. So this isn't strictly an environmental issue, but it's going to have huge ramifications for the environment. This was the bill that will really crack down on, really cause problems for petition gatherers, people trying to get issues on the state to change the state constitution. This bill was signed immediately, flew through the legislature, signed immediately by Governor DeSantis, so it's already law. Among the changes, those who sign petitions must include a current and valid driver's license number, Florida ID card number, or the last 4 digits of your social security number. This is just to sign a petition for this stuff. You also have to attest you're registered to vote in Florida. Petition must include a notice the form will become public record. And it's a first-degree felony to knowingly sign the same petition more than once. Sponsors must post a $1 million bond to the Division of Elections once it's confirmed they've collected 25% of the required signatures. So think about this in terms of, for example, the Right to Clean Water group, which is petitioning to get a right to clean water on the 2026 ballot. I'm actually, in my Vote Water hat, I'm a board member for the Right to Clean Water Initiative. And it's a small grassroots group. They're doing yeoman's work. But now, if they get 25% of the signatures they need, they got to come up with $1 million. Where are they going to come up with $1 million? Why was this a thing? But it is a thing. And there's other provisions to it as well. It effectively kneecaps small citizens groups. And one has to think that was the rationale for this.
Right. And the legislature has a long pattern of that over the past decade. They've increased the number of signatures required to really challenging numbers. And this is just to get things on the ballot for Floridians to consider so that they can decide if they want to amend their own constitution, our constitution. The legislature puts things on the ballot very easily. They can vote in Tallahassee to put things on the ballot and have them considered to be added to the Constitution. And that's happened recently. They don't seem to want everyday Floridians to be able to do it.
No. Only if they can come up with $1 million, right? All right. So as is typically the case during session, there were some good bills out there that went nowhere. Unfortunately, the best one, this is Senate Bill 1646, House Bill 1575. Water quality improvements, among other things, would have required state agencies to create plans to prevent and mitigate harmful algal blooms, take action to ensure nitrogen levels continue to drop in Lake Okeechobee. This is sort of preventative medicine, which we at Friends of the Everglades and a lot of other organizations say we need to do a whole lot more of. It was a great idea. Senate Bill 1646 was Senator Lori Berman. House Bill 1575 was Representative Fentrice Driscoll. Unfortunately, neither bill got a single hearing. As that was also the case with some of the other legislation listed here. The Safe Waterways Act, that would have the second year in a row, at least, that was proposed. That would have required more signage when fecal bacteria is found in waters. Didn't even get any hearings. Advanced wastewater treatment, and then the auxiliary containers. These were the bills that would have expressly permitted local governments to regulate these items, and they didn't get any hearings. So
it would have been great if we had seen the kind of bipartisan support that we saw through the state parks bill translate into these water quality bills. And we just don't see that on legislative proposals that regulate polluters very much. It's a bit of a non-starter in Tallahassee, unfortunately. I get a lot of questions when I talk to people in the community about Governor DeSantis's track record on water quality and the environment. And I always explain that when he was elected in 2018, took office in 2019, he rolled out a strong executive order on the environment. He created the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. He included a number of other measures that were really positive steps on paper, and the follow-through has been lacking. So this bill here, water quality improvements, would have been in line with a lot of what he proposed. But again, we haven't followed through on it. We tend to treat the symptoms, not the disease, in our waterways in Florida.
Right. He created the harmful algal bloom and the Blue-Green Algae Task Forces. He appointed a really good board to the governing board for the South Florida Water Management District. Now that board is a little bit less good because there's been some changes. A lot of what the task forces have done has been sort of stuck on a shelf and ignored. So yeah, that's exactly right. Okay.
I'll remind our audience now, if you guys have questions, we will answer those after we finish updating you here. So just pop those into the comments on whatever platform you're watching on.
Here we have some info about the budget, and basically you can see how far we are apart. They're about $5 billion apart in total. They're tremendous way apart in terms of Everglades restoration proposed spending. And none of this has changed, as the House and Senate basically aren't even really talking to each other, don't even really have a framework with which to begin discussions. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes. But all signs point to the state sort of tightening its belt. I don't know how that's going to play out in terms of Everglades restoration, but we shall see.
Yeah, one of the points of contention is land acquisition. We see the legislature being very comfortable with rural and family lands, conservation easements, but increasingly resistant to land acquisition. But going back to the whole discussion about constitutional amendments, remember in 2014, Florida voters approved Amendment 1, the Water and Land Legacy Amendment, 75% of Florida voters. That is generating significant money, billions of dollars into the state's land acquisition trust fund. The state has not spent that in meaningful ways, and in many instances in very questionable ways. And now we have a legislature that seems to not want to straight out buy parcels for conservation, and is more interested in these easements that may or may not be forever. So
Right.
a real philosophical debate there. And then, Gil, I know you may chime in on this too, but the House really wants some deep tax cuts. The tax breaks have been a big sticking point between the two chambers. Deeper either property tax or sales tax breaks, a lot of discussion there.
But it sounds as if, ultimately that might not happen this year, just because they can't get their heads together on where it's going to be, but it's a good question to go back to this Amendment 1 funding, as you were talking about. I mean, what if we're not going to spend the money on land acquisition, what is it that our legislators think we ought to be spending this money on? The money is specifically allocated for land acquisition. So that's a real concern right there.
It's another example of undermining the will of the voters. So
Absolutely.
That amendment was passed in 2014, and the initial decade of proceeds for the amendment were misspent to the extent that some environmental groups brought a legal challenge, because things like equipment and salaries, a lot of administrative costs were in the expenditures. So now we have another decade of that money coming in. It's going to bring in more than $1.2 billion a year for the next decade. So let's spend it right. Let's do what's right. And they can quibble about tax breaks, but we've got to comply with the will of the voters on that land acquisition money.
Absolutely. All right, Eve, you want to?
Yeah, I think it's worth circling back on the state parks issue. We already talked about sending a message to the governor to sign the State Park Preservation Act into law. Again, it's not yet been transmitted by the legislature to the governor's desk. In fact, a lot of bills have been slowed down as this wrangling is occurring in extended session. So that gives us more time to tell the governor we want him to sign it into law, and to make sure he does so. We know that this will be an ironclad protection for existing state parks, and we need to make it happen. So please fill out that message if you haven't already. Share it with friends. Let's make sure we get this across the finish line, and then we'll go have a party at our state parks.
Exactly.
I'll add a little side note, Gil. You were there with a number of us from our staff. We were hiking at Jonathan Dickinson State Park when the Tampa Bay Times reported last week that Governor DeSantis confirmed he did intend to sign the bill. He was asked at a press conference by Max Chesnes of the Tampa Bay Times, who's done incredible reporting on this topic. So we had a nice moment out there hiking the trails when we got word of this, and really felt like full circle from where we were last summer. And so many really excellent journalists like Max played a role in getting us here, and so many in the environmental community and the grassroots community. While it was an example of how government and democracy should work, it's also really ironic that this is a battle we never should have had to fight in the first place. Like this proposal should not have come to be, but nonetheless, we
But it's
rose up.
interesting. It's interesting, and it's worth mentioning here that when we were in Tallahassee, we heard from some legislators who said they got more calls on this issue than almost any other issue they've ever dealt with. People were up in arms about this. And again, you know, we asked people to reach out to the governor and reach out to these representatives and these senators, and they did it. And not just, you know, people through Friends of the Everglades, but through many of these other conservation organizations that we mentioned that were involved in this as well. So the outpouring of, you know, anger or asking these legislators to do the right thing just sort of was off the charts, and they noticed. They noticed. Our legislators noticed. They notice when their phone is ringing off the hook. They notice when you all, the folks who are following these issues, reach out. And I think it got to be so big that they had to do something about it. And again, kudos to the legislators who proposed these bills. Ultimately, these bills passed the House and Senate unanimously. Everybody recognized that this was something that had to be dealt with. And DeSantis apparently recognizes that in saying that he would sign the bill. We'll wait till the ink is dry before we start, you know, popping the champagne. But I think we're in a pretty good position. So.
Yeah, and we should add here, although it's not in the footprint of the greater Everglades, there was some concerning news about 24 hours ago that another protected area in the Guana River area, Guana Riverland, 600 acres there is proposed for a land swap that the state will consider, a state acquisition and restoration council will consider next week for a vote. And this apparently is part of the envisioned Jack Nicklaus Golf Trail. That's the information that we're hearing. So while the threat is off our state parks proper, there are other public lands, environmentally sensitive public lands in Florida that have targets on them now. So that's really disappointing to hear. And you can check out, again, Florida Springs Council and Florida Wildlife Federation if you want to take action on that.
Speaking of things that are in the greater Everglades footprint.
Yeah, so let's talk about the proposed Southland rock mine for a minute. We have a few minutes here before we get to questions. While this wasn't a legislative proposal this year, it very well could end up being the subject of a legislative appropriation request in the future. And it's really timely and urgent right now. So we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it with you all. So the Southland rock mine is an 8,600 acre mine proposed on land owned by two large sugar companies, U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals, south of Lake Okeechobee in the Everglades agricultural area. So this land is currently sugarcane fields. The proposal has been filed by the engineering firm Phillips and Jordan, and they are seeking approval from the Palm Beach County Commission next Thursday, May 22nd, to do this mining. And they're allowed to do it under a couple of really specific conditions that it's not clear that they have met at all. One of those conditions is if it's a viable water resources project. So Southland, the Big Sugar and Phillips and Jordan have a really slick website. If you go to it, it makes it look like this is like the most environmentally sensitive project ever, even though it's a rock mine. And the fact of the matter is the South Florida Water Management District has just started reviewing this project to see if it's viable, to see if it fits into Everglades restoration plans, or to see if it would damage existing reservation projects like the EAA Reservoir, a $4 billion project that's a stone's throw away right next door. One of the biggest concerns for us at Friends of the Everglades about this 8,600 acre rock mine is that, yeah, you would have a hole in the ground where you could store water, but it doesn't include any meaningful water quality component like man-made marshes, stormwater treatment areas to clean the water. And there's just no success in Everglades restoration if the water is not clean. So we've been working with a whole team of people ahead of the May 22nd vote on this. And this is another issue where you can fill out a form and message Palm Beach County commissioners. It's especially powerful if you live in Palm Beach County or have friends in Palm Beach County to contact them, let them know that you're concerned about this. And we are going to be showing up on Thursday, the 22nd, to try to stop this thing. That's our best chance.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing in some ways. Again, the people behind the rock mine, the applicant, are essentially presenting this to Palm Beach County commissioners as if the South Florida Water Management District has already identified this as a viable water supply, water resource project. They've not done that at all. And one of the most things I find most amazing about this is, as Eve mentioned, the $4 billion EAA reservoir is being built literally right next door to this. I mean, literally right next door. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is building that project, has not yet weighed in on how this could affect, how decades worth of blasting right next to a $4 billion reservoir could affect that reservoir. Again, you read the application, you read the paperwork that goes with this permit, this request, and it's clear the Army Corps has not responded. And so how can we go ahead and sign off on this, approve this, if the Army Corps hasn't even weighed in on how this is going to affect their project next door? It's just, there's so many like sort of loose ends, questions, issues with this. We certainly hope people are going to be able to come out on Thursday and articulate those issues. We'll be there. All indications suggest there will be a crowd of folks there, but the more the merrier. So
yeah. The Everglades agricultural area south of Lake Okeechobee is more than 400,000 acres. Right now, it's mostly sugarcane. And as the soil subsides in that area, we can expect to see Big Sugar, U.S. Sugar, and Florida Crystals proposing other uses for that land, because if there's anything they're good at, it is harvesting profit, layer upon layer of profit. So this rock mine is one of them, and we can expect to see more. So we really don't want to open the floodgates by allowing this unsolicited public-private partnership, which is what it is, to set a precedent in this area. We need to make sure that we acquire land for meaningful restoration in the public interest using those state land acquisition dollars we talked about. That's what our Rescue the River of Grass campaign is all about. And we have many partners in that. We'll be talking to you all more about that in the weeks and months to come. Oh, thank you, Gil.
or the seconds to come.
Yes, weeks, months, and seconds. So Gil has just queued up a slide here on the campaign, Rescue the River of Grass, which we launched publicly in late January. It hinges on acquiring about 100,000 acres of land south of Lake Okeechobee for water storage and water treatment. Remember, we've got to clean the water so it can flow south to the Southern Everglades and Florida Bay instead of being discharged from Lake Okeechobee east and west. For many decades, the sugar industry has had near perfect irrigation and drainage on this land. Taxpayers have paid billions of dollars, literally, to clean up their polluted runoff. And it's time to invest our voter-approved money to in that status quo. The sugarcane industry can keep farming on other land it owns in the EAA, but this is a clear necessity. It's been known for a long time, actually. We've revisited it now with our science team, but we've known for many years in the Everglades community and across Florida that we need significant land south of Lake O for this purpose. So we need to move forward with it. And please, that's another action you can take. We always get questions on these live streams. Yeah, what can I do? So you can sign the Rescue the River of Grass petition and ask friends to do so. And we're going to keep banging this drum until we get the job done, and more to come on this.
And that's the end of the slide.
All right. Well, we will turn to questions now. So Allie Hartman is our communications director behind the scenes. I always want to thank her for the hard work she does at Friends of the Everglades, and she'll be looking at your questions. If you have questions about what happened this legislative session or any of the other topics we discussed, please pop them into the comments and we will take them. All right. Hi, Tony. Tony asks if the links will be available on our site. Yes. So go to everglades.org and go to the news tab and click on the blog there, and you can find links to our targeted actions on the state parks bill, on the Southland rock mine. You can message Palm Beach County commissioners, and Rescue the River of Grass is also right there on our homepage. You can sign that petition and be in the loop on new developments there. Think we can stop the rock mine. Hi, Wayne. Thanks for tuning in. Gil, you want to take a first swing at this one?
Well, county staff is recommending approval to the county commissioners, but this isn't necessarily the end of the story. The applicant needs to get an ERP, an environmental resource permit, from the Department of Environmental Protection. They don't yet have that, and that can be challenged. Similarly, the decision by the county commissioners, if in fact we believe that they decide in favor of the rock mine erroneously, going against their own policies, which has been one of the arguments from the conservation community on this, that could potentially be challenged. So, and again, they have not yet gotten any approval. They haven't even gotten a definitive identification of the site, as noted, from the South Florida Water Management District as a viable thing, let alone gotten, had the governing board approval for the project. So what happens Thursday is going to be pretty important, but it's not the last step in the process. It's not the last, opportunity to stop this. Again, there's more holes in this thing than there is going to be in the ground after they blast, for 40 years. So, ultimately, some of that's going to have to be taken into consideration by these public organizations, and hopefully it will be.
Yeah. Wayne, I'll say yes, I think we can. We certainly have a chance. That's why we're engaged in this fight. I'm encouraged by the number of organizations in the Everglades community and beyond that are speaking up and prioritizing this. It is really important that this be vetted in the public eye and considered in the grand context of Everglades restoration. I mean, if you go back to when Bill Clinton was president, he signed comprehensive Everglades restoration into law. This was a bipartisan effort. He signed it in 2000 as Bush v. Gore was being debated. So there was a lot of bipartisan consensus, even in those really politically fractured times. And SERP has moved forward. Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan has moved forward, and there's still work to be done, even beyond SERP. And we would be totally undermining it if a project of this scale was allowed to proceed in the Everglades agricultural area. And beyond that, they have not met the criteria. They are claiming that the Water Management District has identified it as a viable water resources project. It is simply not true. It's just black and white on paper. The Water Management District has really just started its process of evaluation. And then it's also unclear. One of the other criteria under which companies are allowed to mine in the Everglades agricultural area is if it's for public road building. The aggregate is for public road building purposes. This is under the Palm Beach County Comprehensive Plan. And there's no clear evidence that all of the aggregate that's mined, all of the material mined, would be even suitable for public road building. So it's nearly impossible to promise that, which is probably why they're going for both criteria. So I think we have a really compelling case. We have a lot of really smart people who have fought rock mines in the Everglades area in the past. So I am hopeful. All right, I think we have one more from Instagram. It's going to be a bit of a curveball, Gil. I don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask you. The question is, any foresight on the bill giving extra protections to those that use glyphosate? Sorry, mispronounced.
So I think this is referencing a House Bill 129 that was product liability under Florida pesticide law. That legislative proposal would have prohibited the bringing or maintaining of pesticide-related products liability action for failure to warn if the product label meets specified requirements. In other words, they were basically saying, hey, if the label says it could do this, X, Y, Z, that sort of thing, you can't sue saying, oh, well, it's doing this instead, sort of thing. If it's labeled in a manner that's consistent with EPA requirements, that sort of thing. That bill worked up a head of steam, but ultimately died in early April, and then in early May, it was indefinitely postponed and withdrawn from consideration. So that did not go forward this year, which is a good thing. Yeah. But again, dead with an asterisk. So
yeah, glyphosate is herbicide, Roundup. There has been a big outcry about using these kinds of chemicals and how they impact our waterways around the state. So we will keep an eye on that one in the future. All right, let's see. Do we have any other questions in the audience? We have a few minutes left here. And if you have a question, pop it in now, and we'll try to get to it before we wrap up here. And I just want to, emphasize in our remaining minutes that we're going to keep our eye on Tallahassee. We have great partners up there who are really connected to lawmakers and helping to amplify our priorities in ways that are really helpful. We saw that happen this session. So we're going to keep the pressure on up there. And, I do want to offer some thanks. I mentioned Rep. Snyder earlier and how receptive he was to taking our feedback on the parks bill. And I also want to thank Senator Bradley. She stood really strong in some important moments this session on the parks bill, and want to thank her for her service there. Anything you would want to add, Gil, while we're waiting to see if any more questions roll in?
No, I mean, I think just in general that this was a pretty good session. Knock wood, these are famous last words, because as we noted repeatedly, there's always the possibility some of these terrible ideas are going to be grafted onto the budget legislation, as was the case a couple of years ago with that notorious Senate Bill 2508. So, again, we don't want to do the touchdown dances. We don't want to pop the champagne until the legislators actually go home from Tallahassee and we bring this. But ultimately, the state parks bill was a huge win, and as noted, we scored some defensive wins this year. I think a lot of these conservation organizations, powered by the folks who are watching right now, your concerns and your advocacy, were maybe more effective than in the past in terms of staving off some of these challenges, in terms of mobilizing people. Again, the people who are watching this right now, if any of you sent an email, made a phone call, you made a difference. You made a difference, and more folks are making a difference. And that's, I think, going to sort of come out on the wash in a good way. I think that's going to, if we can continue that sort of momentum, I think it's going to make a world of difference in terms of being able to beat back some of these bad bills, being able to give a boost to some of these good bills. So if you did reach out this session, thank you. You made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm finding that people are really looking for community, grassroots community right now. And Friends of the Everglades was founded by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 1969 to stop the Everglades jetport from being constructed. And that was about grassroots advocacy, and it was effective, and it stopped the jetport along with other allies who are working hard on it too. And that's the kind of work we continue to do today. What happened with the state parks issue, as Gil just said, is evidence that it does matter, and staying engaged matters. There's so much that we can focus on now, and picking a lane, whether it's state parks, whether it's wetlands protections, whether it's glyphosate, picking a lane and staying current on the information is important. And we're here as a resource, not only during these live streams, but again, on our legislative accountability portal on our website. And also, if you want to email us at info@everglades.org. And, we're happy to answer questions throughout the year on environmental issues that percolate. Beyond what's happened in Tallahassee, there's a lot going on at the federal level, and many of you weighed in on protecting our national parks from pretty severe budget cuts and staffing cuts that have been proposed in recent months. So that is not over, and please pay attention as the federal budget is negotiated. We'll keep you informed too. We need to make sure that Everglades National Park, Big Cypress National Preserve, Biscayne National Park, Dry Tortugas National Park are protected. These are some of the most incredible, pristine areas in Florida, and they were set aside and protected for a reason. So if you cared about state parks, I'm sure that you care about national parks too, and there's going to be some grassroots work to be done in the future there. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're wrapping up here. We must have answered all the questions, Gil, because we don't have any more.
Covered all bases, yeah, absolutely.
100%. So I'll just say thanks to you, Gil, for all the hard work tracking this legislation. Hundreds of bills, a couple hundred bills passed this session, and there were more than 1,000 filed to begin with, I know. So it's a lot. It's voluminous, and we appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, we're going to wrap it up a few minutes early, give folks time to finish up their lunch. We will be in touch with an update when the budget finishes, not on a live stream, but on our blog. Stay tuned at everglades.org, and make sure that you're in touch with us if anything looms large in your part of the state of Florida or the greater Everglades. And we appreciate all of you for tuning in. Take care.